God promised Abraham, you're going to have this nation come from you, but Abraham himself never gets to own the land. He's always a sojourner. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. That's Genesis 3, verse 15, also known as the Proto-Evangelium. Young Christian man, welcome back to Seeking Wisdom. As you know, this is the podcast to help Christian young men see life from God's perspective. Today, I want to dive into the book of Genesis with you. Now, just for some context, I've started this Bible reading plan where I'm studying one book of the Bible a month. And I'll let you do the math, but it's going to take me 5.5 years to get through the Bible that way. So as I go through these, I'm going to come back and just give you a 10,000-foot view of what I've learned from these books, just kind of review, and I think it'll be really fun. But before we can start, I have a trivia question for you. How many times did people deceive kings in the book of Genesis? How many times did people deceive kings in the book of Genesis? If you know the answer, go ahead and comment down below. Pause and look it up if you need to. I'll give you the answer at the end of the episode. That brings me to another great thing. If you're able to, please comment, like, share this show, this episode. Tell a friend about it, because I really want this show to be a blessing to as many people as possible. And I've got some great things planned coming up, but those won't do any good if nobody's there to listen to them. So please share this show, get the word out, and we'll be able to help as many people as we can. That being said, let's dive into the book of Genesis. All right, quick exegetical tool. Exegesis is the process of extracting the message from the Bible, exposing what the Bible says. The Bible was not written to you, but it was written for you. Now think about that. The Bible was not written directly to you. You'd be hard-pressed to find, there are very few, and they're debatable, spots in the Bible that are directly written. You could say it was directly written to me. Most of the Bible was not written to you, but the Bible does say that all things were written for us. It says those things were written for our learning. So it's absolutely there for you to learn from, but that doesn't mean it was written to you. Now, that being said, Genesis is no exception to that rule. So when we're studying the book of Genesis, you have to understand the context it was written in. And for that, let's give some quick facts. All right, it was a narrative style. It was written by Moses. Okay, Moses, remember, the great leader who led the people out of the land of Egypt towards the promised land, never got to go into the promised land himself, but he would have been writing this sometime probably during that 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. When he's leading these people, he's reminding them of just the fact that God had chosen them as a people. He's bolstering their faith. So it was written really to the Israelites. Like I said, it's written in a narrative style. Some other quick facts, it's 50 chapters long. It stretches from creation all the way to the beginnings of the Jewish nation. And that the beginning of the Jewish nation correlates approximately with Hammurabi's Law Code, if you're familiar with that. It also corresponds approximately with the beginnings of Greek culture. So if you're a history buff, that kind of puts it in context for you about when this is ending, when the book ends. But the book itself stretches for about 2,000 years. It covers a lot of history, but most of that history is in the first 10 or 11 chapters. First 11 chapters are most of that time. Only a couple hundred years in chapters 12 through 50. Okay, so we can see pretty clearly what God's emphasis is. It's on that time there at the end. We'll get to what that is specifically in a second. But this book by itself contains about 2/3 of the Christian worldview. That's if you're defining the Christian worldview as creation, fall, redemption. So there's this narrative that we believe the world followed, and that's God created, and then man fell, and then God is redeeming. right? Creation and fall both happen in the book of Genesis. The redemption, the process is begun in the book of Genesis. So we have 2/3 plus of our entire worldview is found just in this book. And that's crazy. That really solidifies in my mind, at least, that we ought to be studying this book. This book has the first mention of the Messiah and the first institution of our two primary authority structures. Last week, remember, we talked about how we ought to honor our parents. Family was instituted here in the book of Genesis, as well as God instituted government. God started that in the book of Genesis. No, mankind did not come up with government. That was God's idea. So when you disobey government, you're not just disobeying men, you're disobeying God. And we find that right here. Most of this book centers on one family, and we will see why. We have to go back to the beginning. You already know God created the world. Simple enough. He did it in 6 days, and then on the 7th day, he rested. And I'm not going to get into all the details. So most of what I'm going to say, you're going to have to go find the details for yourself. But this book's theme is that seed promised to Eve. So let me give you the story to that. Back in Genesis, God created, and then man fell, right? After man fell, God comes into the garden, and he goes, Adam, where are you? Adam comes out. Adam and Eve had sewn fig leaves together. And then they come to God, and God pronounces judgment on the world, right? He pronounces judgment first on the serpent, then on the woman, then on the man. But when he pronounces judgment on the serpent, Genesis 3, verse 15, he says, I will put enmity between thy seed and her seed. This is super cool. So God promised right there that there would be a seed who would come who would destroy that serpent. It said that the seed would bruise his head, which if you bruise the serpent's head, you've killed the snake, okay? A serpent is a snake, by the way. So it's talking about this seed who's promised to come later. And we're going to trace the line to that seed throughout this entire book. It's super, super cool. We can outline this book based on what are called toldotes, or books of generations. So because we're tracing the seed, that's the theme through this entire book. That's the string that sews it all together, is this seed. Because we're tracing that seed, we can outline the book based on those toldotes. Now, what is a toldote? It's a Hebrew word. What it's referring to is a genealogy. You could rephrase it as, this is what became of so-and-so. So you'll see constantly in the book of Genesis, the book of the generations of so-and-so. Or you'll see, and these were the generations of so-and-so. What it's saying is, this is what became of so-and-so. The first one is the book of the generations of the heaven and the earth. And then you see the creation of Adam and Eve and the beginnings of the human race. And then you see the generations of Adam. And then you see the generations of Abraham and Seth and the Isaac and Jacob, and I think they talk about Joseph. So it's got this is what became of whoever, fill in the blank right there. So after a toldote, after they say that, they're not going to talk a ton about that person. So like if it's the toldote of Adam, it's going to say the book of the generations of Adam. And then it's not actually going to talk about Adam much. It's going to talk about his descendants. The focus is not on the person or the title, the person in the title. The focus is on the people who came from them, or the events that happened because of them or after them. All right, so this book begins with a prologue explaining creation. We've already kind of talked about that. But just a thought for you. The fact that God created the world refutes atheism, evolution, agnosticism, polytheism, pantheism, and any sort of belief in an eternal universe. Why? Atheism, because in the beginning, God. Evolution, in the beginning, God created. Agnosticism, the fact that God wrote this down tells us that we can know God. Polytheism, in the beginning, God, not gods, one God. Pantheism, in the beginning, God created, meaning that God is separate from his creation. Any sort of belief in an eternal universe can't be can't be because God created, so the universe had a beginning. All right, all of that is refuted just in Genesis 1:1. Super, super important that we get this book down. Immediately after that, we meet in chapter 3 the first sin, or the first human sin at least. Adam and Eve ate of that fruit. And then the man and woman tried to cover up themselves. Adam and Eve tried to cover themselves, but God questions them and then provides his own covering, which is a beautiful picture of salvation. When pronouncing judgment, though, God promised that a seed would come who would bruise the serpent's head, and we are off on our chase of the seed. All right, so this story follows the genealogies. Yes, they're important, all through the godly line of Seth toward a man named Abraham. So we start off with Adam, and then we just kind of keep narrowing it down. It's like a filter. We just chop off some, chop off some, chop off some, until we just get to one family. So we start with Adam and all of his descendants, and then we focus on Seth. Remember that Adam and Eve had two sons, Cain and Abel. Then Abel died. The next son they had was named Seth, and he kind of took Abel's place as the righteous son. So we follow Seth's line, and then we get all the way down, remember, through Methuselah, through Noah, through Shem, and then we get to Abraham, who is the son of Terah. Okay, so Abraham follows God. At this point, his name is still Abram. He follows God to a strange land where he waits for his promised heir. God had told him, Abraham, or Abram, you will have a son, and I will make of you a great nation. You will become a great nation. Abram's journey is a journey of faith. When he acts in faith, everything goes well. When he doesn't, it doesn't go well. Abram finally receives his promised son, remember, still tracing that seed, and then dies in the promised land, having never actually received that land. Isn't it? I don't know. It's kind of interesting to me. God promised Abraham, like, hey, you're going to have this huge nation come from you and you will own this land. But Abraham himself never gets to own the land. When he's there, he's always a sojourner. He's buying land from people, and he owns a little property with a cave on it. But that's it. That's all Abraham owns. Abraham's son, Isaac, is not talked about a whole lot. But he grows up in that land with his dad. And then he repeats some of his dad's same mistakes. And eventually he has two sons of his own. Jacob and Esau are twins who are prophesied about before they're even born. Those are the two sons of Isaac. It's said that the older will serve the younger. Thus, the seed will be traced through that younger son, Jacob. Esau is the older. Jacob is the younger. Now, Jacob buys the birthright from his older brother for a pot of soup. And I'll let you research what a birthright is. But Jacob buys that birthright for a pot of soup from Esau. And then he deceives his father for the paternal blessing. They had this custom where the father would bless his sons, but he would give the greatest, the best blessing to his oldest son. And they would carry on that seed, right? And so Jacob sneaks in and deceives his dad and steals that blessing from the older brother. And in doing so, he fulfills God's prophecy that the older will serve the younger. The older was supposed to get that blessing, but now the younger has it, and now he's going to become the head of the household whenever Isaac dies. So Jacob deceives that, then runs away from his brother, who's understandably, though probably not, well, somewhat justifiably angry at this point. He did sell his birthright, so that takes away some of his justice. But he's angry, and promises to kill Jacob. Esau does. So Jacob runs away, and he is deceived himself by a man named Laban. And then he returns, makes up with his brother, and then finally lives out his days in that promised land. But not all of his days, because Jacob had 12 sons and then some daughters. And they are a motley crew. 10 of the brothers decided one day that they were going to sell their brother into slavery. But hey, at least they didn't kill him, right? So Joseph has 10 brothers, and eventually he would have an 11th brother as well. But Joseph was the favorite of all the brothers, and all the brothers knew it. And so They took Joseph, threw him into a pit, saw some slave traders coming by, and sold Joseph to those slave traders, who then took him down into Egypt. Side note, back to Jacob, his name is changed to Israel after a wrestling match with God that lasted all night. Thus, we get the children of Israel. So the original children of Israel were 12 sons. Joseph, that souled brother, he lives in Egypt, where he is sorrowfully maltreated. It's just a horrible life. He does good and then gets punished for something that he didn't do. And then he ends up in prison, and then he's like running the prison before he gets out. And then eventually Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, comes and gets Joseph himself and says, he hears Joseph's wisdom, and then he appoints Joseph as the second in command over all of Egypt. So despite all the bad things that happened to Joseph, God blesses him, and he rises to the second most powerful position in all of Egypt. It's a huge, awesome story of redemption and God working despite human evil. God does not create evil things, but when they're there, he uses them for good. When a famine comes across the whole world now, Joseph is in the sole position. He's the only person in the world who's able to provide for his family's protection, and he gives them food. He moves them so Joseph's family is living in the promised land still. He gets them to move down to Egypt with him, and he's able to take care of them. And it's a beautiful story of forgiveness. He says to his brothers, "You meant this for evil, but God meant it for good, to save much people alive." Super, super cool story. Please go read it. In Egypt, Jacob dies, which, okay, random thing. While Jacob is in Egypt, he goes up and he blesses Pharaoh, which doesn't sound like a huge deal. To speak a blessing over people, we do that just kind of naturally sometimes, or sometimes it's very unnatural for us, depending on who you are. But back then, what it was, to speak a blessing over somebody meant that you were already in the position of authority over them. You know, you would bless your sons. The sons wouldn't bless the father. The Bible says that the lesser is blessed of the greater. So when Jacob comes into Pharaoh's court, it was a bold, audacious thing for him to go up to the king of the most powerful country in the world and give him a blessing. I just think of, like, you know, those old men who just like don't care, and they're going to do what they want to do, and they don't care who's telling them not to. That's kind of how I imagine Jacob in that scenario. He just walks in and, "Oh, hey, Pharaoh, let me give you a blessing because I am Israel, the chosen of God, so let me bless you." And I don't know, it's just a really cool story. Back to the narrative, though. So Jacob dies, and they bury him back in Canaan. So Joseph gets all the Egyptians and all his family, and they take the body of Jacob back up to Canaan, that promised land, and they bury him there. They lament, and in fact, the Egyptians lament so much for Jacob that the Canaanites living there looked over and they're like, "Man, this guy must have been really important to the Egyptians." I mean, kind of, because their second in command guy was his son. But they go back to Egypt, and Joseph and his family live out the rest of their days in Egypt. When Joseph dies, he commands his family to bring his bones back to the promised land when they return. They did that, but it was going to be 400 years before that could happen. These Israelites live in Egypt for 400 years, and then from there, it butts up right against the story of Exodus. Super cool story, and I just took 50 chapters and condensed it super a lot. What I've just told you is barely even scraping the surface of the book of Genesis. But at the end of the book, we never meet that promised seed. But now we know where he's going to come from, and that's going to be from the children of Israel, God's chosen family. I took a computer program and made a chart chasing all these genealogies, and I made like a scarlet thread, a red line all the way from Adam down to the last descendant in Genesis who would lead to the Messiah. And it was super cool just to watch that red line go all the way through and see how God worked all of this story out to bring us Christ. Reminds me of Galatians, where it says that in the fullness of time, God brought forth his son, made of a woman, made under the law, so that he could save us. It's just so cool. The book of Genesis traces this seed all the way from Adam down to Judah's sons or grandsons, and shows us just where it is that Jesus is going to come from. So that is the story of Genesis in a nutshell, a very small nutshell. Now, for that trivia question from the beginning of our episode, the answer is 3 times. There were 3 times that people deceived kings in the book of Genesis. The first 2 were Abraham. There was a famine one time in Abraham's. That's different from the famine that Joseph was a part of. Abraham had a famine too, and he goes down to Egypt and deceived Pharaoh, lied to him about his wife, said that she was his sister, which was half true because she was his half-sister, but not really true because she was his wife. That kind of trumps being a sister. And then he lied to a man named Abimelech, who was the king of the Philistines in that region. And then Isaac did the same thing, copied the mistakes of his dad, lied also about his wife to another king named Abimelech. That was like a royal title, like how we use the term king or president. They would call their king Abimelech. And so Isaac made the same mistake, lied about his wife, said, no, she's my sister. And then tragic things happened to those families. Their wombs were closed. People got leprosy. It was just terrible. And those stories serve to remind us that we ought to walk in faith. When those 2 men lapsed in faith like that, people were hurt because of them. But when those 2 men would walk in faith, God did incredible, incredible things. And there is the story of Genesis. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed Genesis as much as I did. That was super fun to me. If you want to dive a little deeper into the book of Genesis and you want to study it for yourself, but you're not sure where to start, there are 2 commentaries that I would recommend to you. One is a little bit beefier. It's got a lot more detail to it. It's a very long commentary, super detailed. That is Ariel's Bible Commentary by Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum, right? And it's the commentary on Genesis. It's like about 2 inches thick, and it goes through verse by verse by verse, but it is so insightful. I had to read it for a college class, and it took a lot of time to read, but I'm so glad I did. I learned so much from that book. The other one would be John Phillips' commentary on Genesis. Also a great one. I don't agree with everything John Phillips said in that book, but it's really useful because, well, it's an easier read. He kind of presents it as more like a story. So when you read John Phillips' commentary, you feel like you're just reading a story through the book of Genesis. It's enjoyable, and he has a lot of good information in there. Just be careful because a couple of things are not exactly right, but that's probably true of any commentary. Anyway, so those 2 resources as well. One more. This, if you're not seeing the benefit, you're not sure, like, why would I want to go study Genesis? Another book for you to read would be called Creation Evangelism for the New Millennium. It's a long title written by Ken Ham. You're probably familiar with that name. If not, go look him up. But it's basically just what the title says. It's about using the story of creation, the beginnings of Genesis, for evangelism, because our world has tried so hard to just delete the first 7 chapters of Genesis. They don't want that to be true, because if it is true, then their entire worldview is wrong. But if Genesis 1 through 7 is correct, then the rest of the Bible can be correct as well. And so it just really lays the foundation and really piqued my interest to study the book of Genesis. Every time I pick up Genesis, I think back to that book. Creation Evangelism for the New Millennium by Ken Ham, as well as John Phillips' commentary on Genesis and Ariel's Bible commentary on Genesis. Those 3 resources will be a huge help to you. As always, guys, act like men, be strong.